Talking to myself again, but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not.
Good evening, welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. It is Sunday night and I am joined, I'm delighted to say, by Ben Jacobs. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening, Steve. How are you?
Very good, mate. Very good. Had a good weekend. People are saying that you're late because you're looking for your clapper.
I'm late because I was toying with whether this jumper would be worth wearing or would not be worth the flack that it's inevitably going to get in the comments.
It's very Glastonbury. And what a Glastonbury it's been. Sam Fender smashed it on the Pyramid stage, I've got to say. Paul McCartney, I'm more of a Lennon fan, but I thoroughly enjoyed that last night, especially his little cameos with David Grohl and Bruce Springsteen. Fantastic to see that. Might be 80 years of age, but he can still rock it. And yeah, just one of those things, you know, one of those things I've never been to, but one of those events which is fascinating just to watch it as an observer on the good old BBC. It's one of those things that they do get right. The coverage of Glastonbury is exceptional. But have you been watching it, Ben, or not?
Yeah, I mean, I watched Paul McCartney and it did amuse me, the sort of mixed reception. He's an absolute legend, and you've got to remember he's 80 and headlining at Glastonbury, which is crazy considering that some of us, like me, on certain days struggle to get out of bed in our 30s and need 3 cups of coffee just to get the dog into a park. And there people are talking about the level of, say, performance, and you're like, come on. So I thought he was absolutely brilliant, and obviously has been for decades. And I saw Sam Fender as well, and like you say, making the Northeast proud.
Yeah, we'll have one comment in the jumper. I think Ben's been in Val Doonigan's wardrobe, says Colin. If you're a certain vintage viewers, you will know who Val Doonigan is. If you're not of a certain vintage, Google him and just put in Christmas jumpers. Okay, to the serious issues now surrounding Newcastle United. That's why we'll get Ben on. As always, first half an hour, we will get through as many of the Twitter questions as possible. And as always, there's some good ones. And then we'll go into the comments for the second half of the show. Zebra says, could you ask Ben what is his opinion on the state of football now, with the crazy transfer fees and high wage demands, also agents' fees? Will the spending just get more crazy, or are we going to see the salary cap soon, as I saw this mentioned on other channels? Many thanks.
It's interesting, isn't it? Especially when you look, for example, at Barcelona's finances, and football is naturally going to move in different directions, depend on new owners like at Newcastle United, financial fair play, and each league will eventually have to treat things a little bit differently. And gone may be the days, in my opinion, outside of European competition anyway, of a sort of collective big 5 leagues in Europe, because what we're seeing is the Premier League making moves and La Liga and clubs like Barcelona might not be able to keep pace. And Dembele is a good example of that, showing the sort of modern state of football, that Barcelona want to keep the player, but to do so, they've put an offer on the table that sees him take a pay cut, even though in the back end of the season he was on fire, and he has, based on last season, 13 assists in just 21 La Liga games. And then when you compare that and the fact that they've got a queue of incomings of which they cannot register them at the moment, versus Chelsea, for example, that could go to the same player in Dembele and offer him more money, I don't think we can be too general about the state of football and its finances. And then, of course, add to the mix Jurgen Klopp, who said only a few years back that the day that 100 million is spent on a player, he'll be quitting. And then what have they done? They've brought in Darwin Nunez for potentially, with all the add-ons included, pretty close to 100 million. So football is moving in a variety of different directions. And my personal view is that the actual transfer fees and player wages, even when they seem extortionate, don't matter as long as you get value. And value has to obviously be on the books now because of financial fair play. So PSG argue that when you factor in all of Lionel Messi's costs, they've actually made a $10 million, so about 7 million quid profit overall, factoring in everything from wages, shirt sales, marketing possibilities, brand growth, and so on. And you can be a little bit creative, of course, because you can't put a tangible value on everything. But they argue they're 10 million up, which means that whatever they pay, that's okay, as long as on paper they can prove that, because they're not going bust. Whereas at Barcelona, it's kind of the opposite extreme, unfortunately. So I think the transfer value and even the wages don't matter necessarily, as long as clubs can balance the books. But if they cannot balance the books, then the danger, and the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us this, is that we don't have our top football clubs being sustainable. And if they're not sustainable, then the first port of call is to look at things like wage caps. And then the other factor is just that if you're a lawyer or a teacher, however good you are or experienced you are, if you're walking into the same school or legal chamber every day and you're working directly with, let's just say for the sake of it, 10 other teammates, and you suddenly realize that one of them is earning 30,000 a year at a equivalent level to you, and you want 150k and someone else is on 500k, then eventually there's no parity. So I think that's important as well. Now, naturally, some players will agree better deals, have different agents and so on. But I think that the wage cap at least creates a bit more of a team ethic. And Arsenal's a good example of that, and Chelsea as well, because there's one or two top players there that could, if other names are brought in, be on 200,000 less than another player that they're just as good as, that they're similar age to, that they're playing day on day with. And what that means is a player that's financially conscious and realizes that their careers are short might constantly look for move after move after move. Because if you stay at one club all the time, unless you end up being a Lionel Messi style player, the rest of those footballers that retain loyalty will not be as well compensated throughout their career as a top player that just keeps on moving. And there's an incentivization for the agent as well, because the move can bring you in a big fee too. So I think that the long and short of it is that we need a little bit more transparency around the regulation of football. We need a little bit more proof that our football clubs are sustainable. And then if they are sustainable within the context of their spending, where players are earning these sky-high wages, or we're getting £100 million transfers, it doesn't matter so much. But if a £100 million transfer or a 350,000 quid a week wage is not actually making the football club money, that's where we need change. Because otherwise, the only way of offsetting it beyond sponsorship, which clubs are always striving for, is ultimately having an impact on the fans. And then a football fan will slowly be paying £1 more for their pie, a tenner more for their shirt, etc., until eventually the only way that you can afford this level of spending is expanding your stadium, is increasing your season ticket prices, is adding an extra quid to your program and your French fries on a match day and so on. And that's the problem, that fans should not have to keep footing the bill for things their football club cannot afford. So we need to be very careful. We need more stringent financial fair play rules. But in principle, if a club can turn around and transparently, and that's the key word, show that what looks to you and me like a crazy spend is actually valuable to them, like with Messi, where PSG claim that he has made them 10 million so far, I'm okay with that. But what I'm not okay with is football clubs in debt.
Yeah, okay, great stuff. Get your questions into the chat. We will endeavour to come to them in the second half, but we always open the first half with questions for Twitter. Chris says, all right, lads, we need a striker and a right winger at Newcastle, and we will be ready to go. What's happening, if anything, with Diaby and Osimhen?
Yeah, Diaby's an interesting one. I reported back, I think, on this show that the initial fee, the base transfer fee, was 40 million, and then there'll be some add-ons on top. And I think that Newcastle fans were a little bit surprised by that, because they believe that he's valued more like 60 odd million, and then still add-ons on top. But I think all in, depending on individual and team extras that will have the fee rise, Diaby could be available for somewhere around 50 million, which is a little bit cheaper, like I say, than perhaps others are reporting. But evidence of that is the fact that Newcastle are supposedly preparing a initial offer of somewhere around 35 million. And then again, there'll be add-ons on top. That will be rejected. And it's worth pointing out that Leverkusen are very intent on keeping hold of their top stars. And their sporting director has already said that Diaby is not for sale. But we hear this so many times, particularly in Germany and in Italy, where the clubs say, sorry, there will be no sale. And then a month later, there is a sale. So I still understand that Diaby is available in the market. Newcastle haven't overly advanced this so far. In my opinion, there's other priorities. So they're working first and foremost on completing the Sven Botman deal and looking at who is available as a striker should the Ekitike deal fall through. And then they'll turn their attention to a right-sided player. They are multitasking, and every football club does that. So it's not entirely true to say that they're trying to complete one or two before they ramp up their interest in Diaby. But I just think there's a clear anticipation that Leverkusen are going to go back and forth on this, and it is going to take more than one offer. So the first offer that Newcastle make, which hasn't yet been formally tabled, will be rejected at 35 million. It's kind of testing the water. It's also a way of getting an indication as to whether the player is open to the move. And I'm actually told that he is. So it's one to watch over the course of the window, but I don't think that Diaby is imminent. And then as far as the strikers are concerned, I think we can delve perhaps into Ekitike more specifically if somebody's got a question on that. But more broadly, what's clear and shows that Ekitike is on the ropes a little bit now and the interest from PSG is genuine is the fact that Newcastle are exploring other options. And they've looked at Richarlison, but there is now a belief, I'm told, amongst the club that they won't be able to get him, and his preference is to move to London. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is another name, and then Osimhen, as you asked me about as well, is the third name on Newcastle's radar, but there's absolutely nothing advanced there. And I think with Osimhen, the challenge is the feeling in Serie A, and from talking to sources, is that he will stay now in this window. And that not only is going to make negotiations harder, financially speaking, if Newcastle are to pull him away, but there doesn't appear to be at this stage a firm interest at the player's end to leave for any club. So Newcastle will have some work to do to try and sell that, which is really disappointing because obviously Newcastle have put a lot of time and effort into Ekitike. They thought it was over the line. There's still a possibility that it could be because they've agreed terms with the club, but their agent's proving problematic. PSG have kind of hijacked it. And it's funny really because usually whenever Newcastle make a bid of any sorts, somebody chucks in, oh, PSG are interested. And they do that often because the agent puts that narrative out there, and it maybe either makes Newcastle give more money to the player, or it just shows you what kind of ballpark Newcastle are in at the moment in terms of who their rivals are. And that's testament to the ambition of the football club. But Newcastle are trying to stay sensible. Let's not forget that the hype is all around agents and selling clubs, and to some extent the fan base thinking they're in a conversation for a Richarlison against a Champions League club like Spurs, thinking that they're in the conversation for a Neymar because they're one of the few that has the financial power to get that deal done. And yet Newcastle are renewing a target. They're bringing in a Nick Pope. And that tells you that there's certain boundaries. And if Newcastle cave into the Ekitike agent demands to try and get a player like that at such a young age, then when they then come in for a Diaby or a slightly more globally known name, Ekitike, world-class talent, but still very young, if they come into the conversation for someone a bit more established or with Premier League experience, the danger is that they'll just be known as the club that are prepared to pay that extortionate bit extra, that few million more on an agent fee. So I think they're being very sensible and very hardball, and they're essentially saying, listen, you might think from the outside in that we've got money and we're going to spend irresponsibly, but there's actually no evidence of that in what Newcastle have done so far. So it wouldn't at all surprise me as much out of a statement as because Newcastle are frustrated that they just walk away from the Ekitike deal. But the challenge is there's no other tangible option in place at the moment. So Osimhen to Newcastle, I think, is highly, highly unlikely. Richarlison is a name that they would want for sure, but the intimation is that he is not interested in a Newcastle move comparative to other options on the table. And then Dominic Calvert-Lewin is kind of still there in the background, but again, there's nothing advanced. So at the moment, Newcastle have kind of got all their eggs in the Ekitike basket. And as I've already said, it's not an impossible deal to get over the line because they've put a lot of work in. Everything is advanced, but the agent keeps moving the goalposts. So it's a good test of Newcastle's negotiation skills. But the worry with that is every day that passes, the more likely it is that PSG are going to get an agreement with Ekitike at Newcastle's expense. So I think Newcastle almost now need to just put an ultimatum down and say exactly what their position is with the agent. We either are prepared to do this to get it done quickly, or we're not. And that's our final offer. Let us know the answer by a very set deadline over the course of days rather than weeks. Because if this one drags on, then there's only one conclusion to the saga, and that's that Ekitike will not be joining Newcastle.
Yeah, great stuff, Ben. And I mean, a lot of people asking about Ekitike. I think that answers the questions, and give Ben the job. He could sort this out, I think, is what I would say. Brian says, ask Ben if the club will fast track St James's Park's expansion due to high demand for tickets. Be nice to hear the club's plans. Great chat, Steve. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, obviously Newcastle announced that there'll be 1,000 season tickets up for grabs. They found their ways around the various pitfalls and decided that anyone who bought a ticket from 2019 onwards would be able to, go into the lottery, if you like, to try and get one of these 1,000 season tickets. So it's not going to satisfy the thirst for tickets, where estimations are around about 35,000 on the waiting list at this present moment in time and rising. Is expansion due, sooner rather than later, Ben?
Well, I think it has to be, doesn't it? Because the club are ultimately disappointing thousands of fans that want to buy a season ticket. And the evidence is there that St James's Park could be bigger, perhaps even to the tune of 20 or 25,000, and still keep selling out. And that's credit to the fan base, but also the ownership group, who have proven that in this short space of time, they've been able to re-energize the entire fan base. Because if Mike Ashley put season tickets on sale, even if Newcastle United were in European style form and virtually everything was the same as now, there's no way that the demand would be this high. And that's also because it's clear the fan base, many of them are trying to get in at ground level because they see the direction that the football club is now heading in. There's no intimation that Newcastle are going to release any imminent new plans. And the challenge is always that you miss one opportunity with season ticket sales because you don't have an expanded capacity. And then you have to wait another year and so on before you can get it done. And the sensible thing, if it's feasible, would be to try and do a kind of phased redevelopment to allow business as usual in certain stands or sections whilst trying to expand the capacity. But I think that the expansion of St James's Park, when the plans become fully released, including, with a roadmap as to when things like construction could start, are still some way off. And Jamie Rubin will be a part of that. And PIF will also, as I understand it anyway, have significant input, because they don't just want to say, here's more bums on seats, which is great for the fan base and commercially speaking good because they pull in more income. My understanding is that they look at the Spurs Stadium in particular, and the PIF aspect of the business actually want to make the expansion something that's a bit more community led. So they want to be able to not only give jobs around the redevelopment, but they want to show a wider impact to the community. So they're also going to be looking at what they can do around St James's Park to kind of galvanize the entire area and then bring in non-match day business as well. And these things take a little time, unfortunately, but it wouldn't at all surprise me if we get a significant update from the football club this season. I still think that any end goal on redevelopment is perhaps 2 or 3 seasons away in terms of from start to finish. But fans, again, need to understand that that's just very normal. Chelsea with Stamford Bridge are trying to do exactly the same thing, and they've got far more kind of planning permission issues, and they're further behind in theory, but on paper actually quite advanced, because to buy that football club, they kind of had to put their redevelopment plans in place. So they've got the personnel, they've got an idea of how much they might have to spend. But again, there's no roadmap there. So I do think we'll see some movement. And now that Newcastle feel that they're starting this season in a position where they're only looking up, they can turn their attention, time, energy, and budget to making things a little bit more concrete. Of course, it's worth pointing out that anything they do has to be done as well in conjunction with Newcastle City Council. So the direction of movement needs buy-in far beyond just the football club. And there will be different expansion options and redevelopment options as a result. And there's lots of kind of mini aspects of the area, not just internally, because they'll want to make the stadium more digital friendly with faster internet. They'll want to improve things like scoreboards and screens. They'll look at the outside of the stadium. You'll see this at Qatar 2022 as well, and it's increasingly popular in the Middle East, utilizing digital spaces outside a stadium. And then, of course, the final thing, which is really important, is that fan input is going to be a big part of this as well. And what I think we're going to find is that, unlike with Mike Ashley, before significant decisions are made on visuals, because, for example, if you want to go down the Allianz or Qatar 2022 route and utilize the outside of your stadium, it looks great, particularly at night. But outside of Europe, how many night games do Newcastle play? And then if they're not going to have, at the moment, as many non-football related events like a Wembley Stadium or a Tottenham Stadium, how often is that going to be used? And to do that, it actually changes the look and the feel and the visuals of your stadium. And do the fan base want that? So I think a fan base will want to know 2 things. How big is it going to be, and what is it going to be look like? And then obviously, when is it going to be finished? And all of that is still in reasonably formative stages of discussions. But the fact that it is now known so many people are waiting just to try and get in St James's Park makes it logical that the football club will speed up the process of at least trying to engage with the fan base and the council and work out what's possible and when. But as I understand it, it is still pretty early stages.
Yeah, pretty early stages indeed. Dan says, does Ben think Diaby would be open to a move to us? Read both that he would and that he wouldn't want to come. Also, how are Newcastle viewed in Europe now? Are we an attractive proposition for next level players?
Yeah, Diaby is open to the move as far as I understand it, not just because of Newcastle, but also because of a clear interest in playing Premier League football. And Leverkusen are privately in acceptance that for the right fee, they'll have to let him go. The challenge with Newcastle and Diaby and a lot of other transfers when they're up against a team that last season qualified for Europe is just the fact that Newcastle are not waving around for a player like Diaby if this precedes insane wages comparative to other rivals in the race. So it's always going to be a straight choice between Newcastle United and the project, for want of a better word, versus a football club that already has Champions League football. And then a lot of foreign players, even though Newcastle's a phenomenal city, might be lured by somewhere like London or Manchester. But Sven Botman shows you, when presented on paper at least, even though the Milan bid didn't materialize because they were unable to reach an agreement due to their finances and what they were prepared to pay. Botman's a good example that shows you when a player has, at least on paper, a choice between Milan Champions League versus Newcastle not Champions League, the pull of what Newcastle are pitching versus the fact that Milan had Champions League and the pull of the Premier League versus Serie A eventually gave Botman a decision, and Newcastle United was chosen. Now, you can argue this all kinds of ways, because some will say, well, he only chose Newcastle because the Milan offer never actually became formal and agreed. But I think that the fact Botman was liking posts of him in a Newcastle United kit when Newcastle United were in the relegation zone in January still tells you that he was very much open to the move. And he just had 2 developing and very good offers potentially on the table, of which only one materialised, and he picked Newcastle United, and Diaby falls into the same category. So I think it's entirely inaccurate to say that Diaby is uninterested by a move to Newcastle United. With the case of Neymar, I would say that is a reality, despite rumours linking him with Newcastle. But with Diaby, I think he's very open to a Newcastle United move. So if Newcastle can come to an agreement, I think that that is a deal that is very possible. But the danger for Newcastle, as I've already said, in all of these conversations at the moment, is not about the football club. It's just the fact that as they move into the market, they're almost like a boxer at the moment, punching above their weight with huge ambition and potential. But because of that, everyone they want now, unlike in January, has a rival that, based on last season, in terms of the wages they can offer, in terms of their history. I'm not being derogatory against Newcastle. I'm talking about their short-term history and where they finished and what they qualified for, is elevated comparative to Newcastle. So in January, they were going into the market and looking for players to get them out of a relegation mess. And every single player, arguably bar Kieran Trippier, that made the move to Newcastle either made an equivalent move or a step up, because they came from an Aston Villa or a Burnley. And Leverkusen to Newcastle, fans would argue, is a step up, but not comparative to the other suitors that are looking at that player. Whereas a PSG, Tottenham, and Arsenal, and Manchester United were not looking at Chris Wood, Matt Targett. Even Bruno kind of crept under the radar a little bit, despite the fact that he's been an instant success. Now Newcastle are bidding for players against top quality teams with Champions League or European football in big cities that also pay big wages. And Newcastle are not just going to throw 350,000 so they can say, well, we've offered 100,000 or 200,000 more than a PSG. They're being very sensible in the packages that they're offering. So players have really got a choice when they've got a lot of suitors between, do they want to join Newcastle because of the club, the fan base, the direction of travel, the project from a foundational sense from the very formative stages, and be part of a football club that potentially goes from almost going down to challenging for the Premier League and being in the Champions League? And do they want to see their reputation grow and their wage grow during that process? Or do they want something a bit more instant? And that, like I say, is the interesting dynamic that Newcastle are in. It's no reflection on the football club or their ambition or their finances or the fan base or the city or the ownership. It's just a cold, hard reality of when you are safe, which Newcastle already are, in my opinion, without kicking a ball. And you know that in a worst case season, you're probably now, with the money you've got and the squad you've got, going to finish 15th. And in best case scenario, you're going to finish 4th. And when you know that you want to elevate the depth of the squad and the quality of the squad to get as close as you possibly can to, let's say, European football or certainly the top half, your rivals go from being, for players I mean, Aston Villa and Leicester and West Ham, to PSG and Tottenham and Manchester United and Spurs. And because Newcastle aren't those clubs on paper yet in terms of what they've actually got to offer a player, i.e. European football and even potentially the wages, they may actually in the market be kind of running before they can walk in the ambition of player they're going for, which means that when they then, coming back to Diaby, swoop in for him, the challenge is if they get something advanced and agree a fee, that deal, much like Ekitike, could end up being hijacked by, in inverted commas, a bigger club.
Yeah, interesting times with Newcastle United at the moment. And like I say to everybody, patience is the key. Patience is a virtue, as my dad said. And from our perspective, it's just nice to be involved, because for 14 years, we haven't been involved in many transfer windows. So just sit back and trust the owners, because they will get it right. And they won't be, held over a barrel either. It's another thing to say. Football style, I will come to your question next after the ad break. Just want to give a big thank you, as always, to our sponsor, Spider Miner. Worldwide coverage from the lads and lasses down there. The only cryptocurrency miner that can mine 5 different cryptocurrencies at the same time, whilst using virtually no energy, and it's VPN protected. Buy yours now at www.miner.spidervpn.com. Thanks to Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website www.skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to L&G Family Funeral Directors, 01913897245, and the Garden of Healing Dispensary, CBD, hemp and cannabinoid specialists, www.thegohd.com. Thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, nufcmatters.com. And thanks to Cleek-Eye. Meet the new Game Over screen, drop into a ClearRun device near you, available on Apple Store, Google Play, and clearrun.game. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. If you want to subscribe, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right-hand corner and you can subscribe for free. We still do 7 shows a week. Hit the thumb up to like the video, click share to share to your social media, and drop into the comments box to speak to like-minded Newcastle fans or to post a question on the screen. We'll get to as many of them as we can in the second half. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest. Usually goes up 24 hours after the YouTube show has been broadcast. If you want to become a member, hit join under the video, and there's a small donation to YouTube to become a member and support us that way. If you want to spend a little bit more money and get a cup, a pen, a scarf, and a membership card and entry into the monthly draw, then you can go onto the website, nufcmatters.com, and click membership. Pay a one-off £25 fee, and you become a member for life. Or put your smartphone camera over the QR code, takes you straight to that section on the website. Last month's winner didn't take the season ticket. They took the £1,000 that we gave away on the show, and we will have more information about that later this week as to what they spent the money on, because they have sent us some nice photos. If you want to get a car sticker, they are free. If you subscribe, simply go to nufcmatters.com, email John at nufcmatters.com, and he will post you on out. We do support the food bank on here. NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk is the virtual match day bucket. Very important when there's no matches on that you do manage to donate something. 20 pence, £20, £200, whatever you want to donate, please donate it to the food bank today via the website. Don't forget the Alan Shearer ball raffle. We have another ball up for grabs, $2.99 a ticket, limited to 99 tickets available now at nufcmatters.com. That will be up for a month and we will draw it then. And Tyson Fury is coming to Gateshead July the 7th as part of his Tyson Fury Fest tour. Get your tickets now from goldstarpromotions.co.uk. Been asked to give this a shout out today as well. Peter Beardsley, of course, big fan of NUFC Matters, watches every show. He is doing a coaching session, him and his good pal Kenny Wharton, Monday the 27th of June, 6:45 until 9 p.m. And that's for age categories 12 and over. Fox Hunters Pavilion, North Shields, there are a few places left. If you want one, then email John at nufcmatters.com and he will be able to book your youngster onto that course. And we've been down to watch Peter do these. We'll be popping down again to see him do this. It's absolutely fantastic for your youngsters to be coached by a true legend of the game. So give John an email if your youngster would be interested in going along. Okay, football style. Sorry, but we do the Twitter ones first. So now we're on to you. He's asked this question repeatedly. When will we hear the announcement of Sven Botman? Is it tomorrow? Is he having his medical tomorrow? Have you got any updates on this, Ben? Because obviously the excitement levels hit fever pitch over the weekend when we heard that AC Milan obviously don't have the money. They've had to pull out. Lille, desperate for cash, need the deal to go through before the end of June, as we've talked about on this show. Botman on his way. And I did see your tweet. You'd be disappointed if Newcastle don't announce the signing with no, Botman. John's already got the T-shirts done. But yeah, where are we at with this now, Ben?
Well, first of all, for the chant, there needs to be some kind of continuity from the fan base, because if you listen to the theme music to Batman, there's 16 na-na-na-na-nas, and then there's 12 na-na-na-na-nas. So there has to kind of be an agreement. Otherwise, I worry that nobody in singing it is going to know when to say Botman. And some people are going to go too early and some people are going to go too late. So maybe we can have a little exclusive agreement here and say it's either 12 or 16. And if people put in the chat what they want, then we'll know what the actual right approach is, and then Newcastle can obviously reflect that in their teas. Although actually, maybe they won't do the teas, and then I'll have to keep my promise and unfollow them, which will probably be a far better result for Newcastle United having me unfollow them than actually them having a little bit of a laugh on their social media channels and getting Botman. But on the serious note, the Botman medical sources say it's going to be early in the week. I don't think it will be announced tomorrow. He's traveling still up to Newcastle. Medicals can take between 1 and 2 days. And obviously, there's still the club preference as to whether they want to confirm the signing subject to a medical or after a medical. And the norm now seems to be after the medical. So I think Tuesday, Wednesday is more likely for an announcement on Botman, but we'll know more when we get to the early part of the week. But his agent is in the process of wrapping up all of the final logistical side of things to actually get him to Newcastle, and we'll travel with him as well. And then from there, the medical is just a formality. He will sign for Newcastle United. It's sort of funny how fans get a little bit impatient at this point because they obviously want to celebrate a signing, find out things like shirt numbers, see the player do his first interview. And I totally understand that. But what you also have to understand is for the club to give you all of that when they finally announce it, that adds time as well. So sometimes it's not just the medical. Like I've worked within a number of football clubs where I've been on the content side as a consultant. So when, for example, I was up at Hibernian in Scotland, just to give you a little bit of an insight, we on the content side would get wind of a transfer from the director of football if he was open potentially a week before, and we'd certainly know the targets. And then the player would come for the medical, often with the agent. You'd meet the agent. The medical, like I say, depending on when it was scheduled, could take a day or two. And sometimes it's done quite secretively when there's other clubs in the mix. In this case, I think Newcastle will be quite open about it, but I have been hauled down to training grounds before when medicals have taken place at 6 a.m, kind of undercover before the sun comes up to try and not draw attention to them and so on. And then the football club themselves may want to make a graphic, take a photograph. They could do an interview, all of which takes a little bit of time because that might need editing and uploading. So then when you then see the announcement and you're like, that's great, well done, Newcastle United, that was really fun, that was really creative, perhaps fans underestimate that part of the announcement can't be done until the player arrives either. So I think what you'll see is Botman travel Monday, Tuesday morning, perhaps at the latest, do his medical by at the latest close of play on Tuesday, and then the announcement will either be on Tuesday or Wednesday. That's my understanding at the moment, but these things are never given a specific roadmap, and the reason for that is simply because you can't 100% bank on a medical being passed, and as a consequence, the club will leak or intimate, as will the agent, lots of things about a transfer agreement being done, but they'll never, ever, ever tell you the medical is at exactly this time, it will end at exactly this time, the club will announce it at exactly this time, because then if there are any complications, it would be obvious to the media and the fan base. If the deal, for example, fell through, even though there's a slim possibility of that, it would be completely obvious that it was because the player failed a medical or had a U-turn on where he wanted to go, both of which in this case are virtually impossible because he's healthy and wants to join Newcastle United. But my point is imagine if that happened just in a hypothetical, just so fans understand the process and why football clubs are cagey about saying a medical is happening. If that was a scenario, then that player's got to find another football club, and suddenly it's out there that they had a medical and didn't join. So then the agent would then have to accept that other clubs might know that player's got an injury concern and that could affect the value and so on. Or if the players had a U-turn on their future and done the medical and then said they don't want to join, it's also not a good look, because other clubs will be like, yikes, what if he does that to us as well? So this is why it's a very secretive process. But the short answer, which I know you all want, is that that is a done deal, effectively, bar the medical, and is going to be announced at some point early next week.
Yeah, very exciting. Looking forward to that and the big unveil of him. Next one from Tom Dixon. Question for Ben. If Newcastle get Botman, in what player should we be looking to bring in next? Got to be a striker, Ben.
Has to be, yeah. I mean, we've already said all season, really, that Newcastle's areas to strengthen and probably only likely to get 3 or 4 players as their kind of happy position. 5 would be a bonus, but I think that's an excess of signings, especially given the business that they did in January. So the priorities were goalkeeper, centre-back, right winger, striker as your 4 if you could pick them now. It wouldn't at all surprise me if you had a 5th if it's just a second defender. So the Botman scenario has been a priority, and that's done by the medical. And then the other priority is obviously Ekitike, which tells you that Newcastle need a striker. And the reason for that is naturally because Callum Wilson's in his 30s and has been a bit injury prone of late. And then Newcastle also know that Chris Wood, despite the price tag, is a kind of option within the squad, but definitely not your other talisman that you want as a focal point to get you from trying to get out of trouble in a relegation sense to challenging for the Champions League. And I'm not saying he doesn't have a role to play. He absolutely does. But I think Newcastle need a clear source of goals, or in Ekitike's sense, a kind of long-term striker solution. So then they have the opportunity to kind of keep with Wilson as the focal point, still have Chris Wood, other attacking options like Allan Saint-Maximin and even Almiron. I know fans are sort of divided and there's still a feeling that he could go, but Almiron's agent has said that he wants to stay. And players like that are obviously not solutions long-term to 15 goals or anywhere close. But what you want, if you're not going to have that 15-plus goal scorer, is those players around chipping in with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 goals from wide positions or from attacking midfield. And Bruno falls into that category as well. And that's another way around the solution of not bringing in a striker to the tune of guaranteed 15-plus goals. And they're not that easy to find. And again, when they are, they have interest from the Spurs and the Arsenals and the Chelseas of this world. And some of those clubs have got Champions League football. Others have got Europe. Others perhaps have got the pull of London. So in an ideal world, if you're Newcastle, you say, what do we need next? We need a striker. Let's go out there and put ourselves in the equation for a Gabriel Jesus. But the reality is not only is that deal basically done at Arsenal, but Newcastle can't quite get a player of that caliber yet, because they don't have that lure of European football. And not every single player is just going to be bought into the long-term ambition of Newcastle United Football Club. Some of them that have been playing in Champions League football for pretty much their whole careers don't want to step down and not have Champions League football. And I think that Jesus doesn't fall into that category because Arsenal don't have it next season, but he does fall into the category of player that wants at least European football and wants to be the focal point in the team. So Newcastle could probably offer him, in fairness, the focal point in the team. If you had Jesus, for me anyway, he starts ahead of Callum Wilson if you were only having one striker in a kind of 4-3-3 system. But Newcastle have not got Europe, and any European football is obviously enough for Jesus. But there's a player, for example, like Richarlison, that I think will only want Champions League football if he can possibly get it, which is why Spurs, Chelsea are in the equation and maybe Newcastle United are not. But yeah, striker is obviously what Newcastle need next. And it will be really intriguing to see who they can get. And if after an Ekitike is resolved, whether at Newcastle or elsewhere, they turn their attention to a different kind of player. Because that's what's really interesting about Ekitike. You could make an argument, you get him and you still bring in a more experienced striker because he isn't necessarily going to hit the ground running in the Premier League and be an instant replacement for, let's say, a Callum Wilson. So then what does Eddie Howe do? Does he play 2? Does he bed Ekitike in? Is he more reliant on wide players in a 3-pronged attack? It obviously gives Howe variation and depth. But for those desperately wanting Ekitike and thinking maybe he's the striker solution now, and then you move on to your, let's just say, right winger, I disagree a little bit, because I think however much of a talent and potential he's got, I'm not convinced if he joins Newcastle today and starts that he is going to hit the ground running and weigh in with 10 to 15 goals. And then if that's the case, maybe Howe has to balance various attacking options. or push harder to make sure that ASM doesn't go anywhere. And make no mistake, there's a strong possibility that he could be an outgoing in this window. There's certainly plenty of interest. So then what do you do if you're Newcastle? Do you actually put 2 strikers on the radar? So this is the sort of finesse and intrigue of the transfer window. And Newcastle may yet have to bring in one more option because of an outgoing that they either don't want or would prefer not to have or aren't expecting. There's a long, long way to go in the window. And I think because of the circumstance at Newcastle at the moment where Botman was kind of pushed since January, Ekitike is in place, but the agent's causing problems. Target was always likely to be an early signing if Newcastle could get the deal done because they obviously had him already from the loan spell. The same can be said for Pope as well, because we knew that Newcastle were going to go quickly into the market to try and get a goalkeeper to challenge Dubravka. So then you can almost be lulled into thinking, well, who's next? Who's next? Who's next? But actually, if Newcastle get all these deals done, that may be pretty much their business unless they get an outgoing that forces them to make another replacement. So whereas some clubs will drag things on throughout the window, and Diaby, in fairness, could be the one that does actually take a little bit longer. But my point is, don't be surprised if we get very excited about a big influx of Newcastle signings very early in the window, 3 to 4 come in and get done, and then suddenly things go quiet. And the fan base may just have to accept that once 4 or a maximum of 5 come in, that is Newcastle's business done. And from a sporting director's point of view, Dan Ashworth will be delighted about that, because these sporting directors don't want to keep being in the market, as we find with Liverpool. If you get your business done early, you relax, you stop pulling your hair out, and you go and have a holiday before the season starts. And fair play to any football club that gets their 4 to 5 targets in this early, gets back on day 1 of pre-season and has the new faces there from day 1 ready to bed in, and then you just relax. And then if anything opportunistically comes in the back end of the window, or if a late offer comes in for an ASM, the player goes, and then Newcastle have to swoop for somebody, so be it. But I think once you hit 4 to 5 maximum signings, that's Newcastle's business done. And in those 4 or 5, I'm including Pope, and I'm including Target, I'm including Botman, I'm including Ekitike or another striker. So that really only leaves room for one more.
Liam Kennedy will be back, Mr. Anderson. I was with Liam the other night with the Andy Griffin talking, and he could be back very soon. So watch this space, but he will be back on NUFC Matters 100%. Okay, you did touch on ASM, and there was a question about ASM. The rumours about Spurs, I can't remember who asked the question. It was Paul Regret. He says, does Ben know if there's any truth in Spurs' interest in ASM?
Yeah, Tottenham and Chelsea have both looked, nothing advanced, nothing offered. No real progress on a deal other than the testing of the water. And it will be really interesting to see how this one progresses during the course of the window. The kind of situation with Tottenham is that they've been looking at other targets. So they've put themselves in the mix for Rafinha and Richarlison as well. And from Chelsea's point of view, ASM is not a priority either, which is reassuring, I guess, from a Newcastle fan perspective. So Chelsea's number 1 target is Raheem Sterling. And I think Chelsea will make 2 attack-minded signings. And at the moment, sources suggest it's going to be Sterling plus 1. And they will look at Dembele plus Sterling, but it's a wage issue with Dembele, and maybe now a fear that anything Chelsea offer at this stage could just be used as leverage to get him a slightly better deal at Barcelona. That one's a really intriguing and complicated scenario with lots of competing narratives. And you have the player who's a bit miffed at effectively having to sign for a wage cut, but also would like to stay at Barcelona in an ideal world. You have the Barcelona board that are hugely frustrated with the situation. They've had this renewal deal on the table since December. And then PSG, which would have been a destination Dembele would have liked to go to, have cooled their interest because Campos isn't that keen on the player. And then although Thomas Tuchel said to Todd Boehly, I'd like the player, Chelsea are not going to break the bank to the point of insanity. And the irony of saying that is it will still, in all likelihood, as sources tell me anyway, end up, if he joins, being Chelsea's top earner or somewhere very close. So that's in the high 200,000s just to join a football club. And yet he wants more. And if you talk to some Barcelona sources, he's been asking for well in excess of $500,000 a week. And even though this may just be tabloid talk, some are even saying at one point, he said that he wanted 700,000 a week to stay in euros, which is absolute insanity for a player in his mid-20s. So then when you then go beyond that, Chelsea have got other attack-minded names that they're looking at, including Rafinha, and then ASM starts to come into the equation. So I think that if ASM leaves and goes to one of those two Premier League clubs, it will be later in the window, and it will be because they don't get their targets, which means that Newcastle actually will kind of be keeping their fingers crossed that Tottenham get Richarlison and that Rafinha chooses Spurs over potentially Arsenal, or picks Chelsea and Sterling arrives. Because if Chelsea get in two other attackers early, and if Tottenham get one of their targets, and then if Arsenal end up bringing in, obviously, Gabriel Jesus, plus potentially Rafinha as well, you sort of then hit a scenario where all those London clubs that are vaguely looking, and just so I don't spark anything that's false, when I say ASM, I'm talking specifically Tottenham, Chelsea, not Arsenal, but Arsenal could still play a part, because if Arsenal get a player that Chelsea or Tottenham want, then that's when they might come back in for ASM. So that's why I'm mentioning Arsenal. But I think if those London clubs get the targets they want, and ASM is not above some of the names I've mentioned in the pecking order, he's below them, then it's much more likely that he'll stay at Newcastle United. But sources certainly tell me close to the player that his head has kind of been turned by this interest. So it's not impossible that he'll leave, but nothing is imminent. I know Newcastle love it, the fans, when I use that word imminent. And I vowed not to use the word imminent outside of the takeover again, because it sends shudders down most of our spines. But what I would say is at this point, Saint-Maximin leaving Newcastle isn't imminent, but it's a merry-go-round where if Chelsea and Spurs don't get their current targets that are more advanced, that's where later in the window you still could see them coming back in for ASM. And I actually think that if the reported fee of 40 odd million for him to depart is true, that is a bargain deal for any of the clubs. So, Newcastle need to watch that one very closely, because the player, I think, is actually open to a move to London.
Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left. Thanks to everybody in the chat. Over 540 watching today live, which is fantastic. And thanks to everyone who moderates on the channel, just keeping the chat polite, kind and courteous, and getting us through the show. Stephen Kennedy says, would you keep Lascelles for another season as cover, or are we counting Dummett and Kraft as centre-half cover? Obviously, the imminent arrival of Botman does throw out that question. Will we keep a hold of Lascelles? Could he be on his way back to Forest? Could Darlow be on his way back to Forest as well? Could we be giving the players back? Or Fernandez, you would imagine, will be surplus to requirements. Kieran Clark, as we've already said, we've heard on more than one occasion on this show that he will be away sooner rather than later. But Lascelles is a different one. A captain of the team, of course.
Yeah, Nottingham Forest are definitely looking at him. And I think for the reasons that you've just mentioned and the names that you've alluded to, there is enough cover. And it's not just Botman's arrival, it's the fact that Dan Burn has come in as well and done really well too. So Newcastle suddenly seem okay in this particular department. And they have to be fair as well and determine what the player's preference is, because somebody like a captain who will probably be stripped of that armband, at least in a playing sense, even if they do what my club Leicester did and kind of a courteous if he stays and kind of say club captain, but playing captain or day-to-day armband gets given to another player, then you sort of have to work out, what does he want to do? Is the priority to still be part of this Newcastle revolution, knowing that he effectively is just a bit part player, or does he want to go, and is he hungry enough at the age still of 28 to be playing in regular first team football? And I think the challenge for Jamal is just that right now, once Botman comes in, I don't see him playing that much first team football unless there's an injury to somebody else. So he's got a big decision to make. Newcastle have got a big decision to make, but there's interest there from Forest that is being ramped up. And the other thing as well is just that there is probably a acceptance on Howe's part that he has to have some outgoings from the squad as well. One, in case, as I said before, there's that opportunism to bring in an extra name here or there. But two, because if you add that one extra signing that I said may or may not happen only in terms of numerics, it might still be another defender as well. And then they're going to have to offload somebody. And unfortunately, that's likely to be Jamal. So it's going to be really interesting. And then I think the other thing is, who would they then give the captaincy to? And for me, anyway, I think Kieran Trippier would be a superb choice, but Newcastle fans will presumably have their own opinions on this. And what's great from Newcastle's perspective is that there's probably 6 or 7 leaders in that team that are all very capable of taking on the armband.
Yeah, well, exactly. 5 minutes left, Ben. We've got a few questions in the inbox still here. So let's see if we can have a couple of short answers to these ones before we finish. Any chance of Lucas Paqueta coming in, says Justin?
Yes, it's possible. Again, another target that Newcastle are looking at for sure. The Paqueta pro is the fact that he has heard great things from Bruno. And I think the other factor with Paqueta is just that he sort of is quite kind of intent, from what I hear, on joining the Premier League. So Tottenham have been looking at Paqueta as well. So historically, his people have actually been speaking about a move to the Premier League, and the players intimated that that is where he wants to go next. But Newcastle will have to ramp up their efforts pretty quickly. The other thing, by the way, is that he randomly injured himself flying a kite, from what I gather, and that will actually force him to have surgery. So that shouldn't hamper anything too much, because it's only a minor injury. But Newcastle are in the mix there. There's nothing that's really particularly advanced, again, in that deal. But I can confirm he's on Newcastle's shortlist, and they would have to use Bruno and their Brazilian contingent to really try and sell that move, because Spurs are just a little bit further along the line. But nobody from the Premier League as yet, as far as I understand it anyway, has actually tabled an offer yet. So there's plenty of time left in the window for that one.
John Ball asking about Ward-Prowse, and Kevin Miller, asking about Ward-Prowse and Ericsson. Lots of rumours. Have we scouted or made bids for either of these players?
Ward-Prowse is a really interesting one, isn't he? Because consistently performing, set-piece specialist of huge value to any club. I'd love to know how tactically Joe Linton, Bruno and James Ward-Prowse would all play in that kind of central midfield aspect. Because it sort of strikes me with Ward-Prowse that he'll sit a little bit deeper, and then could you kind of play a diamond formation, and then what, do you have 2 wide players and then put Callum Wilson in front? But that obviously isn't what Eddie Howe has been doing in the past. But if you get Ward-Prowse at Newcastle United, then you frame a team around him for me. But you've got Bruno at Newcastle United, and you frame a team around him, and you've got Joe Linton at Newcastle United. So you'd be sport for choice with sort of central midfielders, whether you're calling them box-to-box attacking or defensive midfielders. Ward-Prowse, though, would be an asset to any team. I don't see him joining Newcastle United, though, but they are looking at players left, right and centre that can kind of elevate the football team from, as one source put it, a kind of top half into a top 4 as quick as they possibly can. So what Newcastle are going to tell you on paper, or when they do media interviews, is top half would be a great finish. But privately, they're still looking for that 1 or 2 names that they can frame a team around to get far beyond just the top half. They'll never publicly say that, but you know, part of the recruitment model is to do that. And James Ward-Prowse falls into that category. I don't see it happening this summer for Newcastle. If I'm honest, I think there's going to be a ton of interest in him, and you've got to find the best part of 70 to 75 million. So I'm not so sure about that one. Ericsson is a more interesting one in terms of likelihood. I'd put James Ward-Prowse to Newcastle at sort of 30%. It's just my personal opinion. I'd put Ericsson to Newcastle United at more like a 50-50, because Newcastle are one of about 5 clubs now that are significantly increasing their interest. So people are billing this as a straight choice between Brentford and Manchester United. I think that's accurate at this stage. And don't rule out just signing a new deal with Brentford, because Eriksen and Thomas Frank go way back. And I think that he does respect the fact that Brentford showed that loyalty in him. At one point, I think Eriksen thought that he'd just be able to go back to Spurs. But as I've reported a few weeks ago, Spurs never tabled an offer. So his only two concrete offers on the table in terms of formal offers to pick between is Brentford and Manchester United. And it says a lot about Manchester United that he still hasn't decided, and that they cannot just use the lure of the football club to get him to go there. But he hasn't rejected Manchester United either. But in the last week, Newcastle have intensified their advances, as I understand it, and so have Leeds and Leicester. And those are the clubs that I think he'll end up deciding from. Newcastle sources have always been pretty coy on Eriksen and said that there's other targets, not a priority, therefore, it may be they just cool off their interest and pursue a Diaby, pursue a Paqueta, but they're very much in the conversation. And so are Leicester now, and so are Leeds. And from Leeds' perspective, if they lose Rafinha, they'll be looking for another attack-minded player, and Eriksen falls into that category as well. The only thing I think maybe going against Newcastle with Eriksen is just the fact that Eriksen wants to make a decision quickly, and at this stage, Newcastle are not as advanced as they'd like to be. So he's either going to have to delay because a club like Newcastle put in a call and say, well, just wait and see what we're going to present you, or they're going to have to move very fast because there's just other clubs that are in a more concrete position. And if Eriksen's people are saying he's going to make a decision in a matter of days or even potentially hours, then that suggests that he is more likely to just decide between Brentford out of loyalty and because Spurs hasn't materialised, or Manchester United out of ambition, and the other clubs are going to have to do something pretty dramatic to hijack that pretty quickly. But, Newcastle have certainly been interested in Eriksen, so watch this space, but I wouldn't call them the favourites at this point.
Yeah, Eriksen owes it to Brentford for me to stay there. They stood by him, they gave him an opportunity when nobody else would. I think his heart should be telling him, Brentford, forget about the money, Christian, forget about moving elsewhere. I think you do owe that to Brentford. Last question before we finish. Ben, if Newcastle beat Leicester 5-0 next season, says John, home and away, will that be enough to make you a full-time Newcastle fan?
No, of course not. Newcastle will always be one of my soft spot clubs, but it will never extend beyond that. I'm a firm believer that you support the club closest to you where you're born or where you've got a backstory. I'm not totally against somebody that says they support one club but live in a different area, but you've got to have a story. So it's either because your parents took you there, or there was a moment where you fell in love with the culture of the club or a particular player, or it's just the home city where you're from. So Leicester City could lose 20-0 to Newcastle home and away, and I'll drown my sorrows in a pub and continue supporting them, because it's not just about following a football team. It's also about supporting the community around it. It's where your friends are. It's where you grew up. It's often where your family lives. So therefore, there's no chance of me actually replacing Leicester with Newcastle. And if Newcastle end up thrashing Leicester 5-0 and 5-0, that's only 2 games. So then when Leicester win the other 36, we'll still finish first. And Newcastle will end up second again anyway. So I'm perfectly happy with that. But I think that I wish Newcastle well for the new season. As I've said many times, it'd be great to see the ownership group continue to be transparent, and that includes PIF. And there are some difficult questions to be answered, but it's also brilliant to see the fan base re-energized and the club on the field grow from strength to strength. And we all know from the Keegan era that when Newcastle are flying high and St James's Park is rocking, what it does for the football club and the community. And when Bruno, in a relatively meaningless game, actually, I know at that point Newcastle were not mathematically safe, but when Bruno got that last-minute winner against Leicester, you see firsthand, even as an away supporter, what it means. And at 1 a.m, when I was in like a fancy bar that wasn't really a football hotspot, people are still chanting Bruno, Bruno, whether they're in suits, whether they're in Newcastle shirts, and it bleeds into the whole week and it sets the whole tone for the city. And that's what makes the football club special. And I'm not saying other football clubs don't have that, Leicester do as well. It's a great community. It's got a great affinity with the ownership group. It's got a brilliant manager in Brendan Rodgers. But when you have a football club like that on the field and as a fan base, it's hard not to like. So there's big change. There's big ambition. There's big questions to be answered by the majority owners who have still not been open and transparent with the media and with the fan base. And that shouldn't just be brushed aside either. And I've said that many times, but I certainly wish Newcastle United well for the new season because it's exciting times. And I'll always have a soft spot for Newcastle United because whenever you have such a passionate fan base, like the football club or loathe the football club, like the ownership group or loathe the ownership group, see the football club as a threat or be glad that there's another major player in the Premier League, it's hard not to like, because whenever you see joy on a supporter's face, because the team kicking a ball for them are scoring goals and making them happy and making them feel that they get hard-earned value for their money spent, and it's expensive to see a Premier League football club, it's hard not to like that because it's just raw, unbridled passion. And people can criticize Newcastle and the fan base day on day. And I may do that at times as well, because as I say, there will be questions that need answering when there's direct links with the football club. And at other times, there'll be unfair criticism as well. But fundamentally, when someone's week is made because a player they idolize scores a goal that wins a match, that elevates the football club, and they can celebrate that and enjoy that, and it makes their week and it improves their mental health and it gives them hope and it brings families together, then at that base level, at a purely football level, that's hard not to like, which is why I really enjoy seeing the Newcastle fan base celebrate and feel like they've got a connection back with their fan club. And as long as they don't finish above Leicester, I wish you well for the new season.
Great stuff. A sophisticated bar in Newcastle. He must have been in the Black Garter. Good stuff, Ben.
I think it was called The Botanist.
Oh, right, The Botanist, yeah. It's got trees and things inside.
Yeah, it's an indoor garden. Right. It's got a lovely high ceiling, good cocktails. It had like live acoustic guitar music, and we absolutely loved it. And we were there until about...
We'll take you to some proper bars. I don't think you'll get in the strawberry, says John, with that jumper on, though. So you'll have to make sure you haven't got that jumper on. Listen, as always, Ben, fantastic. You can find Ben on Twitter at JacobsBen. Where else can people find you, Ben?
Pretty much at JacobsBen on Twitter or at Ben David Jacobs on Instagram. Still not being persuaded to do TikTok, and then CBS, where I'm a staff reporter at CBS Sports Golasso. Those are our handles on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
Great stuff, mate. Hopefully get you back on next Sunday. Have a great week, mate. Thanks for a fantastic insight. Take care. Have a good week.
All the best.